Hello and welcome to a very special edition of Puck Talk. My name is Jack Woods. With me today is a personal hero of mine, Robbie Stanley, host of Robbie and Rex Road Power T podcast on 102.5 The Game, founder of the Unshakable Foundation, and he hosts one of my favorite podcasts, Locked on Predators. Robbie, how are you doing today?
Jack, I'm doing good, brother. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for coming on. So let's dive right into this with the Nashville Predators free agency. Predators are presumably done. They fixed up the third pairing. They added a little bit more, quote, grit to the lineup. Your first impressions on the Predators free agent signings?
Well, David Poile said in the offseason he was going to make some changes to this team, and he certainly did that. This team is going to look very different next year than we've grown accustomed to it seeing. I'm still trying to determine whether or not that's a good thing. I do think there were some changes needed, obviously, given the way that things have gone with the Predators the last 2 years, specifically in the playoffs. It just hasn't gone well. But I do think sometimes you can go too far the other way. I'm interested to see what this looks like for the Predators. I do like the moves that they've made. I like adding more grit to the lineup. But, Jack, I'll be honest, I look at the lineup right now and I look at that second line specifically, and I'm wondering where the goals are going to come from. I mean, you've got Matt Duchene. I would have Eeli Tolvanen and Luke Kunin probably playing with him right now. And, you know, if Eeli Tolvanen comes in and works out, that's great. But if he doesn't, you got a big problem there. So I'm interested to see if the Predators are done in free agency. I think they are. But I'm never surprised by what David Poile does anymore, and we'll see what maybe opens up on the trade deadline as well. So they're different. I like a lot of what they've done. I think they've got the most complete defense they've had in a long time. I really like adding Borowiecki and Benning to the third pair. I think it's an upgrade as opposed to what they've had the last few years. So I like it from that perspective. But offensively, I think there's a lot of pressure on Johansson, Forsberg, Duchene, and Arvidsson to really snap out of it all at the same time and have a much better year than they had a year ago. If they do that, this team is going to be hard-pressed to score goals.
Well, you mentioned Tolvanen a little bit. They're placing a lot of faith in somebody who hasn't had a whole lot of NHL experience, somebody who's been touted as the future of the Predators offense, but, you know, Tolvanen wasn't exactly showing his goal-scoring prowess in Milwaukee. Do you think that he can adjust well to the NHL lifestyle, or do you think that he's going to struggle a little bit?
Well, it's interesting with him because ever since Tolvanen came over, I mean, he came over with so much hype, and I tried to warn people at the time when he was 18 that there is a gigantic difference between the KHL and the NHL. The KHL is a very good league. It's not the NHL. And there's a different kind of way that you have to play the game. You have to be, I guess, more willing to go to the hard areas. You got to work to create room. And I think a lot of what happened in the KHL early on with Eeli Tolvanen was that there was so much room out there. He could just put his natural shot and his natural ability on display. And it doesn't work like that in the NHL. You got to find ways to get open. You got to find ways to move without the puck and give yourself the best chance to create offense that way. And I think that was a big learning curve for him. Number one, I think he needed to get in better shape. I mean, he was a guy that I think dropped 15 pounds last offseason. He looked quicker, moved better. I think was, muscle-wise a little bit sharper in that area, stronger in that area, and that helped. He still didn't have the type of season last year in Milwaukee that I thought he could, but the natural goal scoring ability has always been there. I mean, he's got an elite level shot. He's always had an elite level shot. The problem has always been, how do you get open to use it? I think he's made progress in that area. Now, has he made enough progress where he's going to step into the top six and score 20, 25 goals? I don't know if I'm willing to go there yet. But right now, the way this roster is constructed, he's going to have to if this team is going to make some noise offensively. I think it puts a lot of pressure on him. I think it puts a lot of pressure on Matt Duchene as well to make sure that they are as productive as they can be. If Tolvanen's figured it out away from the puck and how to move in the offensive zone and how to create some space, then I think you could be cooking with gas because that shot has always been there. That's why I was really intrigued, to be honest with you, Jack, about Taylor Hall, because not only would Taylor Hall give the Matt Duchene somebody to play with on the left wing, but I think you could also at that point stick Tolvanen on the right wing. And Taylor Hall and Matt Duchene are going to attract a lot of attention. That's a pretty good way to open up Ellie Tolvanen. So I was interested to see if the Predators would go that route. Obviously, they didn't. Taylor Hall signs in Buffalo, but I think they're asking a lot of him to come in and just be ready to contribute at that high of a level when we haven't seen him do it before. Not saying he can't do it, but I think it's asking a lot.
Well, you mentioned that, what happens to this Predator lineup if Tolvanen can't come on and be that guy? And I look at players like Colton Sissons, Luke Cunnin, Richardson, Cousins, guys that I feel serve the same role on the team or could serve the same role in that bottom six role. But do you believe that Colton Sissons should get a crack at the top six this season, considering that his goals, his offensive capabilities have kind of been repressed by more offensive talent? Do you think that he should move up to the second line if Tolvanen or Cunnin doesn't work out, or do you think that Colton Sissons is and will always be a bottom six player?
I think he's better served in the bottom six. But if you're going to put him in the top six, he does bring kind of a different element than they have there, and that is he's not afraid to go to the net. And we just saw how effective that could be with Nick Bonino. He also is not afraid to go to the net, and they've lost him. They traded him away. I do think Colton Sissons, his skill set is better served down the middle. He's been on the wing a lot lately. I really like putting him down the middle at the center ice position. I think he's good in the faceoff circle. And I think that just opens up his options a little bit more and brings out some of that skill like you were talking about there, Jack. I would expect that that's where he starts, is in the bottom six. Luke Cunnin, to me, is interesting. I mean, he put up 31 points last year. He's still young, 22 years old. He's got a little bit of Ryan Kessler in his game, not to the same extent, but it's like Ryan Kessler light. Pretty much is what some people in Minnesota have called him. I think that's good. I think the Predators need a little bit of that grit and nastiness to him. But I also think, you got to think he's a former first-round pick. I think there is some offensive ability there as well. So he would probably be the guy that I give the first crack at playing in the top six with Matt Duchene as their roster is currently constructed. But I think there is going to be a lot of moving parts. Like, I think there is going to be a lot of mixing and matching. Everybody, I think, is just assuming that they're going to leave that Forsberg, Johansson, Arvidsson line together. And certainly if they do that, you understand it because they historically played very well together and they look great together in the playoffs against Arizona. But you also have to factor in, like, there's got to be some sort of balance in the top six as well. Like, you can't just load it up all the time and expect your team to be successful from a depth scoring perspective. So I am interested to see what they do there, but I would probably keep Sissons in the bottom six if I were putting the lineup together. Having said that, I expect at some point he'll probably end up in the top six.
Well, and one thing I think that Predator fans learned these past couple of years is that David Poile can't go out and buy an all-star team. He can't go out and buy talent if the talent's not there and if the talent doesn't fit in the system. But speaking of the system, there are a lot of AHL Milwaukee Admirals defensemen who were vying for a roster spot, and it looks like Carrier is the only one who will get a crack at it, as Jared Tenorti, Mark Borowiecki, and Matt Benning seem to make up that third pairing. So what do you think is going to happen with the Nashville's back end?
Well, I think it's interesting because, look, you're set with the top four, right? That top four is going to be set for a while, and that's Josi, Ellis, Ekholm, and Fabro. An underrated thing that I think could be a big factor for them this year. I think sometimes people forget that Fabro was 21 years old a year ago. So there were times where he looked great, and there were times where he looked like, 21-year-old defenseman. And that you expect that happens. I think he's going to take a pretty big jump in year two. Now, what that looks like offensively, I don't know. I don't think Fabro is like, a Roman Josi light or anything like that. I think he plays the game a little bit differently. He's more of a Ryan Suter type of player. Not saying he's going to turn into Ryan Suter, but he's more of a Ryan Suter type of player. So I think he and Ekholm have a chance to be pretty good this year. I like what I saw from Fabro towards the end of the year. So I feel great about their top four. And like I said, I think, Borowiecki, him coming in, and then Matt Benning as well, their third pair I feel better about than I have in a long time. I mean, let's be honest. Matt Irwin, Yannick Weber, they're great guys. It was rough out there at times. The end of Dan Hamhuis' career, it was rough. I mean, the numbers were not good. And I've always said, you don't need your third pair to go out and just make a huge difference for you. You don't need them to score a big goal. Basically, the job of a third pair in the NHL is get out there and don't screw it up. That's your job. Don't go out there and screw it up. And too often that hurt the Predators, especially on the road when the opposing team could, have the last chance and control the matchups a little bit better. I think teams are going to have a harder time doing that this year. I like Borowiecki and Benning together as a pair. It's a tough break for Carrier because I think he feels like he's ready, but I think, I don't know. This is no disrespect to him. I think he's kind of a tweener to me. And what I mean by that is I think he's probably too good for the AHL. I'm not sure he's good enough for the NHL. And there's a couple guys that I've found in my career of covering this team that have been that way. I think back a long time ago, the Predators used to have a player named Cal O'Reilly, and he would just dominate at the AHL level. I mean, he put up 65, 70 points in Milwaukee, and you're like, okay, this kid's ready to play. And every time he came up to the NHL, it just didn't work. And sometimes that happens. Sometimes, for whatever reason, I think Daniel Carr is a great example of that. I mean, he lights it up at the AHL level. He gets here in the NHL, and whether it's the fit, whether it's the system, whatever the case may be, it just doesn't work out the same way. From what I've seen out of Carrier, that's kind of how I feel about him at the moment. Now, he's still young. He's got a chance to improve. And it's important for him, I think, to stick with it because I like Jarred Tinordi. I don't think Jarred Tinordi is long-term a viable option here. So you still got a chance if you're Carrier to be the seventh guy. And as we know, in an 82-game season, and especially a season like this where you have no clue what it's going to look like or what's going to happen, or God forbid somebody gets COVID for 2 weeks and you're out, like all these things are on the table. If you're Carrier, you got to be ready to go because I think he's on the short list of call-ups. So I think it's easy for a young guy like that when you see the Preds go out and make moves to get discouraged, like, hey, they don't believe in me, or I'm not going to have a chance to make the team. This year, more so than really any other year, you got to be ready. And I think he will be. Just knowing what I know about him, I think he'll be ready. And then the question becomes, all right, have you improved enough to be able to stick at the NHL level?
Well, someone's got to lead the minor leagues in home runs, right? Somebody's got to lead the minor leagues in strikeouts. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just, what do the Predators need right now? And I thought that the injection of youth would extend into the defensive pairings. But at the same time, I'm not dissatisfied with what David Poile has done with the third pairing. Like you said, Robbie, Yannick Weber and Matt Irwin are awesome guys to hang out with, but I don't think that they belong on the Predators anymore. And you mentioned being ready, and I don't know, Robbie, I think that fifth-year seniors should be ready to go and ready to compete in SEC football games, and it just looks like that Jarrett Guarantano is not the Tennessee quarterback that they need anymore.
No, it's bad. It was really bad this past week against Kentucky, and look, I mean, it's not a surprise. Like, you know what Jarrett Guarantano is. Like, this is what he is right now is what he's been. And that's fine. Like, when he's at his best, he's a decent quarterback. I mean, I think back to the Georgia game. I think it was the second pass he had to Josh Palmer for the touchdown. It was a great throw. Like, Tom Brady himself could not have thrown a better ball. But the problem is that happens like one time, and then you don't see it again for 3 games. I mean, that's an issue at the SEC level. So I think that why he was the starting quarterback heading into this year was, number one, the experience, but number two, the decision-making. Like, the decision-making in the second half of last year and through the first 2 games of this year was really good. I mean, he's making the right reads. He was going the right direction with the ball. And that doesn't mean he always made the throw, because the South Carolina game, he missed about 5 or 6 of them, which you just can't miss at the SEC level. But at least he wasn't doing anything to kill you, to hurt you. And the last 6 quarters, he's done that. And you can't have that. I mean, you can't have that as a fifth-year senior quarterback. So they got some interesting decisions to make. I think it's an indictment on the coaching staff that you're in the beginning of Jeremy Pruitt's 3rd year, and you still don't have a guy to take a spot of a guy like Jarrett Guarantano. It's a problem. I mean, Tennessee fans are hoping Harrison Bailey, the true freshman 5-star quarterback, they're hoping he's that guy. But, he's 18 years old. It's a little different, especially this year with COVID and not having spring ball and having to quarantine during fall camp. I just don't know how realistic it is that he comes in and plays right away. So they got a predicament this Saturday. I don't think it matters who's at quarterback. They're playing Alabama, so good luck. Have fun with that. Their offense is going to put up about 65 points. That's just what they do. But going forward after that, it's interesting because I know a lot of Tennessee fans are discouraged, and I get it. I get why. But you look at that schedule, there's not a game left on that schedule after Alabama that they can't win. Now, that doesn't mean they're going to win them. There's not really a game on that schedule, maybe outside of Vanderbilt, that they can't lose either. So, but I think some people are just pulling the plug and giving up on the season. And my advice would be just wait. There's still a lot of talent on that roster. Basically, what you need to do when you're not playing Georgia and Alabama and Florida to a certain degree, teams that are more talented than you are, you just need your quarterback to not screw it up. And that's got to be what they find, whether it's Garantano, whether it's Brian Maurer, maybe eventually if it's Harrison Bailey. And then moving into next season and the year beyond that, you're hoping Harrison Bailey is the special kind of player that you can build around.
Well, and you mentioned it briefly. The fact that Jarrett Garantano is still the guy after 3 years is a testament to how ready the other guys actually are, because we've heard nothing from Jeremy Pruitt. Hey, Garantano's the guy, and if you've been at practice, you can know that he's the guy. And it bothers me that in year 3, Tennessee is getting blown out by Kentucky in Neyland Stadium, whereas Kirby Smart only needs 1 7-5 season, and Georgia's ready to compete for a title. I'm not saying that Kirby Smart didn't inherit less of a mess at Georgia after Mark Richt. And I'm not saying that Butch Jones and Derek Dooley didn't curse this program for another 20 years or so, but I do believe that Tennessee should be competing for the SEC East at the very least. And I think that the expectations this year have not been met thus far.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And look, the loss to Georgia is one thing. I mean, to be honest with you, like the fact that they hung in there for the first half, to me, was a giant positive. I thought they were going to have to play a perfect game just to be in that game in the fourth quarter. And quite frankly, I thought they did a lot of stupid stuff in the first half, shot themselves in the foot, and were still winning. So the fact that happened was, I think, really encouraging to me. Now, granted, Georgia snapped the ball at 25 yards over their head on the first play and gift wrapped them a touchdown. So that obviously helps, and I understand that. But the second half, you fall apart. Garantano makes a bad decision and throws a pick, and really the game turned from there. But it's Georgia. You understand that. Kentucky, look, even when Tennessee's been bad, they've been beating Kentucky. And I get it. Mark Stoops has done a great job at Kentucky. That team, it's not the same Kentucky team as we're used to seeing. This Kentucky team is actually pretty good. They're not that good. They're not 34-7 good against Tennessee. And Joe Rexrode, who does the morning show with me on 102.5 The Game, he said, still, if Tennessee and Kentucky played 10 times, he'd pick Tennessee to win 7 times, just from a talent perspective. But everything that could go wrong for Tennessee on Saturday went wrong, and you can't turn the ball over. If you're Jarrett Garantano, number one, the first pick, it's an out route, right? So it's 3rd and 4, and you're running a route. Number one, you're on the left hash, and you got Jarrett Garantano, who doesn't have the biggest arm anyway. He's throwing basically 50 yards across the field to try to pick up 4 yards. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. From a play calling standpoint, it's a bad decision. It's a bad throw on his part. You got to see that if you're the quarterback that, hey, I just snapped the ball. They're in press coverage. The defender is literally right on top of Josh Palmer. Maybe I shouldn't throw this ball. That's on Garantano. And then the second pick six was just brutal. I don't know what he's looking at. I don't know if Kentucky's white jersey was not different enough for him from the orange. I don't know what was going on there, but it was just awful. It was an awful throw. And when you're turning the ball over with Tennessee's where they're at right now, they just don't have a margin for error for that. And that's what happened. I mean, you saw it after that. Tennessee ran the ball once they got down 17-0 and ran right down the field. I mean, their offensive line dominated Kentucky in that game. But you dig yourself into a 17-0 hole, it's going to be pretty hard to dig out of that.
Well, and they seem to be trusting Garantano with the ball. For some reason, they keep feeding him chances, and I don't know what fans are expecting him to do. I don't know what the coaches are expecting Garantano to do other than, like you said, one great throw to Josh Palmer in the first half and then a horde of missed throws and misreads. But one positive about Tennessee's team that I really like in terms of implementing the old Tennessee way is running the football right down the other team's throat. I think that this offensive line, I think that the running back core at Tennessee is as good as it's ever been. I won't say that they're better than Jalen Hurd and Alvin Kamara, but they're pretty solid. So why do you think Tennessee hasn't been running the ball as much?
Well, that's a great question, and I think offensive coordinator Jim Chaney, he's had a bad year. He's had a bad first 4 games to me, and even in the South Carolina and Missouri games, there were times where I was just like, "What are you doing, man?" Like they won those games because they are significantly more talented than South Carolina and Missouri, and that's fine. That's great. The Missouri game, I think, was a perfect example of what can happen when you're going up against teams like that. They just ran the ball. Like they ran the ball right down their throat. It worked. And I thought maybe they even ran the ball too much in that game. There were times where Tennessee had some open receivers that they got away from. Like they would have an open receiver on one play, and then they go back to running it 5 times in a row. But it was working so well that you really couldn't argue it. Against Georgia, they just totally abandoned the running game. Like they turned Jarrett Guarantano into like this drop back, let's throw the ball 45 times a game type of passer, and that's just not going to work. Like I get it. It's hard to run the ball against Georgia, and they weren't having a whole lot of success. But you can't abandon the run even when you're winning. Like even in the third quarter, they're winning the game, and they got away from the run, and that's what got them into trouble. So I don't think it's been a very good year for Jim Chaney so far. I thought he was horrible on Saturday against Kentucky, which you're starting to hear Jeremy Pruitt like call him out in the post-game press conference. They were talking about the first pick, and he's like, "Yeah, I didn't like the play call." And then he tried to couch it by saying, "Yeah, some of that's on me too." But when your head coach is saying that, he's not really taking responsibility. What he's doing is publicly calling out the offensive play caller. And I think moving forward here, there's a lot of pressure on Jim Chaney to get better there. I mean, basically the playbook offensively has been when you're not running the ball up the middle, you're running a 10-yard out route and you're throwing it to Josh Palmer. It's got to be a little bit more expansive than that in the SEC if you're going to win. And it hasn't been that way so far. Now, who knows? Maybe that's all they feel comfortable doing with Guarantano. But if that's the case, if he's in his 5th year and that's all you're comfortable doing, put somebody else in. I mean, what's it going to hurt? If that's all you're comfortable doing, you're not accomplishing anything at that point anyway.
Yeah, and Robbie, as Tennessee sports fans, we are most acquainted with misery with the Predators and with the Volunteers, but the Tennessee Titans have, for some reason, turned it around this year. Derrick Henry with the AFC Offensive Player of the Week, 212 yards on the ground. What have you liked about Derrick Henry's game thus far for the Titans?
Well, he is one of the most incredible athletes I think I've ever seen in my time of covering sports, just because, like, there's nobody really like him. I mean, he's 6'3", he's 250 pounds. And you think, okay, he's big, he's hard to tackle, but he can't run. And then you watch him pull away from everybody on a 94-yard touchdown run. He got clocked at 21.6 miles an hour, which is just freakishly fast. So that combination of size, speed, and then power, like we saw when he basically, stiff-armed Josh Norman into the next county against Buffalo the other night. I mean, it's I've never seen anything like it. So, I think a lot of Titans fans locally kind of get uncomfortable when you start comparing people to Eddie George and Steve McNair. But the combo they got going right now with Ryan Tannehill and Derrick Henry, it's pretty good. Like it is every bit as good as that combo was. Now, Steve McNair and Eddie George, they did it together for a long time. And certainly Tannehill and Henry haven't been together anywhere near as long and haven't sustained it for as long as McNair and Eddie George have. But that combo they got working with right now with Tannehill and Derrick Henry is pretty special. I mean, some of the numbers they're putting up have never been done before in the history of the NFL. So, you're in special territory when you're talking about that. And I think, through 5 games, I realize it's very early. There's still a lot of work left to do, and they've lost Taylor Lewan. So we'll see how that affects the way their offense looks. But through 5 games, you've got 2 legitimate MVP candidates on the same team. And that's really hard to do. You don't see that a whole lot at the NFL level. And honestly, I don't know right now who my vote would be. I don't know if I would give it to Tannehill or Henry. I might lean Tannehill slightly, but it's close. It changes by the game.
Well, I'm going to have to go with Henry for the MVP on that one just because I like the dude a lot. But Tannehill's numbers are comparable to that of Patrick Mahomes the last, I believe, 15 games. He's thrown more touchdown passes, has more passing yards total. Do you think that Tannehill, what is the difference between Ryan Tannehill in Miami and Ryan Tannehill in Tennessee?
Well, I think number one is probably he's away from Adam Gase, which we're seeing that in New York, that's a horrible place to be, is with Adam Gase. So I do think there's something to that. And sometimes a change of scenery just works out. Like sometimes you go to a different place, you've got a fresh outlook on stuff. And I think this fit between him and Arthur Smith, I've never really seen a quarterback and an offensive coordinator be on the same page like they are. Now, a lot of people listening, if you're not a big Titans fan, but you follow the league, you're probably thinking, well, yeah, it's easy to play quarterback when you've got Derrick Henry as your running back. I get that. It is. I think that certainly helps him, but I also think that he really helps Derrick Henry. Like, Derrick Henry's been a good player for a long time, and he was a good player with Marcus Mariota. He was not this good with Marcus Mariota, and I think Tannehill deserves a lot of credit for that because now defenses have to respect the passing game, the play action that they're able to run off of Henry, and then moving it to the passing game with Tannehill. It's lethal. I mean, there's nothing you can really do to stop it because if you back off, they're just going to run the ball down your throat with Henry. And if you creep up too far, they're throwing it right over your head to A.J. Brown or Johnny Smith or whoever the case may be. So Arthur Smith is dialing up some good plays. I just really like the way Ryan Tannehill fits in this offense. And I think if you go back and you look at the numbers in Miami, even though it didn't work out there for him, other than injuries, he was pretty good. I mean, he threw for 4,000 yards one year. Didn't have a whole lot of weapons offensively to speak of and still found a way to move the ball. I just think injuries were the big deal for him in Miami. And like I said, awful coaching. And when you get away from awful coaching, it's amazing what you look like as a player and as a quarterback. And Ryan Tannehill, like you said, Jack, he is playing as well as any quarterback in the league is right now.
Yeah, and transitioning into larger NFL news, Tom Brady is not the same player as he was under Bill Belichick, but he's still pretty darn good. Thoughts on how Tom Brady's doing in Tampa Bay right now?
Well, I think it was a slow start for him in that offense to try and figure out. I mean, that's a lot of new pieces coming in, and you don't have preseason games. So I think there's a lot that you have to work through there. And also an underrated part of it that I don't think a lot of people talk about, like Brady's been in the same system for 20 years. So they've had some different offensive coordinators come in and out of there, but they're basically running the same thing and have been for 20 years. This system under Bruce Arians is not the same. Like it's totally different. And for the first time in a long time, I think he's had to learn some new verbiage, some new playbook, maybe some new concepts that he's not used to running. So when you factor those two things in, like everybody coming in that's new and the new things that he's got to learn, I think it took some time. Now, unfortunately, I'm a Green Bay Packers fan, and they seemed to all figure it out last week. The Bucs did against my Packers, put up 38 points against them. So that was not very good timing for Tom Brady to break out and look like Tom Brady of 2013. But he did, and Gronk looked great. And you got, Godwin, Mike Evans, Ronald Jones, I think is an underrated back. There's a lot of good pieces there in Tampa Bay to like. I think probably the biggest thing about their team that most people don't realize, their defense is really good. Like that Tampa Bay defense is really good. And that team, that was a good team before he got there. Just Jameis threw about 700 interceptions last year, and it's hard to win the game that way. Tom Brady's not going to turn the ball over all that much. If you could just have competent quarterback play, you're going to be there. I think they're a dangerous team in the NFC. That pains me to say, because I want my Packers to do well in the NFC, but I think the Buccaneers are legit. They're really good.
Well, I mean, Green Bay's not playing horrible. They're 4-1 right now. I think Rodgers only showed he was human last week with 2 interceptions, but all in all, Aaron Rodgers has been playing phenomenally. What do you think is the difference maker, or what do you think that Aaron Rodgers can do better in the coming weeks against Houston, Minnesota, San Francisco? Just what do you think he can do better?
Well, I think the first 4 games, he was playing at a level that was just as good, if not better than anybody in the league. Like he was on point. That offense was the highest scoring offense in the league. They were scoring more than 40 a game, and they just looked great. And it's interesting because the talk in Green Bay is just imagine what the offense could look like if you ever drafted a freaking receiver for Aaron Rodgers to go in there and play with. And it's interesting, he's been in the league a long time. He got drafted in 05. He's a Hall of Fame quarterback, no question about it. He's thrown 2 touchdown passes in his career to a first-round draft pick. And both of those came to Mercedes Lewis, who is about a 55-year-old tight end right now. He's not 55, but he is about 36, 37. So both of those have come in the last year. Those are the only 2 touchdown passes he's thrown in his career to a first-round pick. Now, Devontae Adams, for those who don't know, he's a receiver for the Packers. He's top 5 receiver in the game when he's on. So that makes up for it. He's really good. But they don't have a whole lot of weapons at receiver. So it's been pretty amazing to watch what Rodgers has done the first 4 games, and then it fell apart on Sunday against Tampa. He threw the pick 6, basically threw another pick 6. After that, it got returned to the 2, and then Tampa scored on the next play. And it's really the only time this year that he's made very poor decisions with the ball. And it looked like he got rattled after that. Tampa did a good job of creating pressure. So the biggest thing for Rodgers is if you make a mistake, which doesn't happen a whole lot. I mean, his interception ratio is incredibly low. Like, he rarely throws interceptions. But this past week, he let it get to him a little bit, which is weird talking about it with Aaron Rodgers. He can't do that again. I think sometimes with not having the weapons that he wants to have at the receiver position, he tries to force it too much to Devontae Adams. That's what happened on the first pick. That's what happened on the second pick. Every now and then you got to go somewhere else with the ball. And if he does that, I think they'll be okay.
And Robbie, I got one last question for you, and then I think I've got class. The age-long debate between LeBron James and Michael Jordan. Now, I asked Fox News' Claudia Chikaman, and she gave me the correct answer in that Michael Jordan is the best basketball player of all time. And I know it's old news that the Lakers won the NBA championship, but I did want to get your perspective on it. Is it LeBron or is it Michael? Who is the GOAT?
I would lean Michael, but I do think it's close. Like, I think it's a lot closer than a lot of people want to admit. I mean, some people just say that Michael Jordan, it's clear he's the runaway greatest of all time, and they point to the 6-0 finals record, and that's fine. That is what it is. LeBron James has gotten to the finals more than he has, which means he has been there in the dance more times than Michael Jordan has. Michael Jordan got eliminated before then more times. So a lot of people leave that conveniently out of the conversation sometimes. I do think Michael Jordan is the greatest of all time. I'll be honest, I was 6 when Michael Jordan won his last championship with the Bulls. So I remember watching him play a little bit, but not a lot. Like, I remember actually watching him play more for the Washington Wizards than I did the Chicago Bulls, which he was still really good then, but it wasn't the same MJ. So watching The Last Dance was really helpful. Like, it put me kind of in the situation of viewing what it was like to watch him play through that lens back in the 90s, and I thought that was really cool. Now, I will say LeBron, and I'm partially biased here because he did used to play for my beloved Miami Heat and won 2 championships with them, so I will always remember that. But he has won championships with 3 different franchises now, and I think a lot of people underestimate how hard that is to do. And not only win 3 championships, but be the key cog on 3 championships. And a lot of people say, well, it's easy. You go to Miami, you join Dwayne Wade and Chris Bosh, and of course you won a championship. Or you got Kyrie in Cleveland, and you've got Anthony Davis in LA. I get it. It's a different time in the NBA. They didn't used to do things that way. That's fine. Michael Jordan did play with a Hall of Famer that got to the Eastern Conference Finals in Game 7 without him one time. So, I mean, it's not like there was no talent on those teams either. But I will give the slight edge to Jordan. I think you could make some cases that LeBron James, as an all-around basketball player, maybe better. He's a better rebounder. He's certainly a better passer. I think he's got more athleticism. I think physically he's more gifted than Michael Jordan was. The difference is Michael Jordan, from a pure scorer / mentality standpoint, was an absolute assassin. And LeBron James is not that. So I will give the slight edge to Jordan, but I will say, if LeBron wins another one next year and he gets up to 5, and he's still playing at this level this late in his career, my answer on that's probably going to change.
Well, Robbie, I am unfortunately out of time. I cannot thank you enough for coming on this show. We've been trying since January, right?
Yeah.
Something like that. So I really appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Well, Robbie, we'll hope to have you back here on Puck Talk. This has been Puck Talk with Spider Jack. We'll see you next time.